All right. Thank you for coming. I appreciate that a whole lot. We are moving right along. I have hopes that there aren't too many people that are still having questions about task 3. But if there are, I need you to ask now so that we can get the experience of people who have gotten it done and moved on. Those kinds of things are helpful to ask because sometimes your peers can help you out a little. Okay, nothing there. Okay, anything for 4? Task 4. Everybody's got that under control. And task 5, everybody knows what they're doing with that. And so we just move right along. And are there questions about the competency folio? Yes, who had a question?
We have a task 4 question real quick.
Yes,
The task 4, because I'm done with it. I just am messing with the meeting because I think I'm putting too much information in the POC meeting. Is to say when I say POC meeting, am I like typing everything that was said, or am I just saying it was approved?
No. You're talking about what happened. You're talking about, an introduction might be when it was, where it was, who attended, did you go over the norms, then talk about how you made your presentation, and then, you're presenting the information that you presented, not slide by slide, but talk about the data. Just go through what you did. Okay. And then when you get in 4, when you start doing, at the end of 3, you said what it was you were going to use to address the need. Okay, so when you get to 4, you're going to flesh that out. You've got to go through and talk about what are you going to do, and you're going to do each of those columns. We talked about who's going to do it, what are we going to do, who's going to do it, when are they going to do it, when are you going to have benchmarks, what are you going to do for your formative and summative assessment, all that. And you're going to talk about that in a narrative. And then you're going to show the action plan chart. It's a graphic, right? Okay, did that help, Ms. Hall?
Yeah.
It wasn't Ms. Hall? I couldn't tell.
Yes, it did.
Yeah, okay.
Yes, it was Ms. Hall.
Okay, so is that helpful, or what other question would you have? Because keep asking until you feel good.
No, that's what I was doing.
Okay, then you're on the right track.
That was what I was doing, but I wasn't sure I was on the right track.
Yes, okay, well that's always good to ask rather than do and then find out you weren't. So that's a good thing. That's a good thing. We're all friends and supporters here. Anybody else have a question?
I know Dr. Todd said she was a little behind in grading, but my 4 and 5 have been well, and I haven't gotten an appeal on 4. Do you want me to go ahead and submit it to you?
Yeah, you're breaking up some. I'm not sure exactly what the problem is, but I think your question was, should you go ahead and submit 4? And I would say go ahead, yes. Okay.
And you want to see 5 as well, correct?
I will look at 5. I will not be giving a lot of feedback on 5 unless I see something really big, because I'm going to be evaluating the competency folio. Okay.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
So really, if I just go ahead and give you 4, I can still wait on her to comment on 5 before I send that to you.
Probably that would be good. But 4, if you just go ahead and send 4, that would be great.
Okay.
Actually, I'm still reading.
Okay.
I had a 2 come in today, and I had a number of 3s come in today. So that's where I am. I'm really trying to get the people 2, 3, and then once you get through 3, the 4 should just fall in place, because you've decided what it is you need to do, and then all you have to do is put it into a format that shows the plan for getting it done. And you're going to do a narrative, of course, but the plan, actually, I have suggested to some people that they do the graphic and then flesh out the narrative from the graphic. If you know, sometimes people work better backwards like that. So I've found that works sometimes. Okay, other questions about 3? Questions about 4? Okay, and 5 is just fine. Now, when you get to that competency folio, I want to make sure that you go to that paper that I sent you, and it was called, I think, a competency record, maybe. Somebody referred to it last night. If you look on the second page of that, there is a very clear statement there as to exactly how you should document this in your portfolio. And if you'll start it out doing it exactly like that, your life will be very organized and you'll know when you're finished. It even, I even say down to drawing the line after you finish a submission. That way, when you come back and you do the second submission, you just drop below the line and do a new narrative. Put in, if there's something good that's a digital competency, go ahead and do it. It's all right if you do 2 for the same competency. If something comes up and you think, oh my gosh, this is really nice, I really like the professional look that I gave this, go ahead and put it in there. And then put your documentation. And for the probably umpteenth time, I'm saying, don't attach big chunks of this work. Don't put task 2 as an evidence. Don't put task 3 as an evidence. Pull out what it is that you want the evaluator to look at as an example of whatever competency that you're talking about. Okay, questions about the competency folio? And I know that Dr. Lamb in his discussion says all that competency folio is not due until the end of the semester. And here's why he says that. Because it's not going to be put into task stream until the end of the semester. But if you get half of it done now, your life is going to be so much easier than if you wait till the end of the semester and you've got to do all 21 by lamplight to meet the deadline. Okay, so go ahead and get it done. We had said, we want you to get it done as soon as you finish the actual paper, because it's fresh on your mind. You remember what you did. It's easier to write the narrative because it's really fresh. It's easier to figure out what you'd like to submit. It's easier to find what you want to submit because you've just been working with it. By the time you get into the teacher empowerment and leadership piece, you're going to leave this stuff behind and you're just going to be all mired up in that. And then it'll be harder to go back and figure out what it was that you did that was an excellent example of whatever. So anyway, questions about the competency folio? Is there anyone that went into it and couldn't get in, tried to get into it and couldn't get into it? Okay, so everybody's been in it. They know it's there. I did notice somebody sent one in and they marked out or they deleted the definition of the competency. When you go in there, it has the name of the competency, it has the 3 places, you know, whether it's the AAPSL, the AAPTEL, and an open-ended. And then under that, it says, here's the definition of that. So sometimes if you just read the definition, it'll click as to what was the best thing I should put here. So it's okay, but be careful and don't delete those because it's helpful for you. And then you're just going to put your narrative, your documentation, and make sure that you say if it's a digital competency, and you're going to draw a line and be ready for the next submission. Okay, that's enough about that unless there's a question. Okay, boy, we are moving right along. I'm excited for you. Okay, Dr. Todd talked a lot about the analysis and action plan for teacher empowerment and leadership. And no matter how many times I say this, I don't know, there's always somebody who didn't hear what I said. So when you do this activity, there are 2 branches. There's the classroom teacher empowerment and leadership, and there is the school-wide empowerment and leadership. So all through this, you have to be thinking about those 2 areas. So try to make sure that you're always thinking in 2 areas. Now, you should, I ask you to bring your little notebook or whatever you have your handbook in so that we can talk about the actual rubric. And I think that's the easiest way for us to go through this. The first thing you have to do is a literature review. You know what that is, right? You've got a paragraph, at least a paragraph, for each of your citations. You're not going to just muddle them all together. It's much better if you will go to each citation. Now, the question is, what is the literature review about? Look at the rubric for task 1. It says, the candidate will conduct a literature review with bibliography reflecting various teacher empowerment and leadership best practices, areas to be addressed. Oh, how many areas are there to be addressed? How many? Yes, 5.
5.
Okay, 5 areas. Now, if you're going to address 5 areas, what is the minimum number of references you must have? This is a no-brainer. 5, right? Okay, I think it says somewhere in the evaluators part that in order to be accomplished, you have to have at least 6. Okay, so just sort of think about that. But if you are going to be doing a literature review and there are 5 things that you're reviewing, I would think that there would be some of those things you would need to do more than 1 review on. So you've got to use your own judgment. This is not to complete this activity. This project is for you to learn about teacher empowerment and leadership. So when you read that first resource and you still aren't quite sure, that should be an indicator that you need to look at another one. Okay, this is about learning. Please don't do it as, I got to get this, I've got 1 more, I've got 5 things, I've got to do 1 on each one. What's the smallest thing I can read and get done? Please don't go there. You will be so sorry when they hand you the keys to the kingdom, because when you get those keys, you're going to know everything you can possibly know and have lots of resources of people you can call to find out something else. So read good readings. Okay, so those 5 things: building efficacy and empowerment among staff. Now, just thinking about that, if I were going to see if it was happening in my school, would I look in a classroom or would I ask a teacher?
If you're looking for efficacy, you just watch it because you want to.
Would I see it in a classroom or would I?
You're actually implementing it, right?
Would you? Well, efficacy. What does that mean to you? What does that word mean?
Well, I always thought it meant implementation. Like, are you following through with what you're supposed to be doing? Is that not what it is?
I think
Somebody
to be
else?
confident and
Go ahead.
sorry, Victoria, I was
That's okay.
trying to talk over you.
I think we both talked at the same time.
Go ahead.
Right.
I was just saying, I take it to mean the confidence a teacher has in her own abilities and how comfortable she is in her own teaching styles and the things she's implementing in her classroom.
So I think you see that in the
Correctness.
I'm really having trouble hearing you folks. I'm sort of breaking up. I don't know. I could hear Victoria pretty well, but
you've been on everybody else's.
am I coming and going also? Oh, I am so sorry. I don't know what to do here.
Yes.
I don't like that. I'll get a little closer and you can see my wrinkles better. Okay. Does that help any? Maybe it's my computer. Okay.
No.
There they are.
It is, it's stalling just a little.
Okay. So efficacy is more like what Mrs. Powell was saying. It's that confidence that you know and that you, so if teachers are confident in their ability to teach, you might see that in the classroom.
Then you see it shows in the classroom.
But you will also see it in other places because those people who have confidence end up being the leaders, whether they're formal or informal. Do you have teachers in your building that don't hold a title, but when people have trouble, they go see them? Yeah, those are the leaders. I don't care what you call them, you know, and efficacy is high on the list there. So that one is more school-wide. Okay, so the next one says, results-oriented professional development. Could you see that more in a classroom to see if that's happening, or would you ask a teacher?
Well, to me, that would be what you learn in professional development if you are putting it into place in the classroom.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
So I would think you go there.
Okay, so classroom. And it's sort of interesting that you really need to get a good focus on these terms and which way it would be easiest to document whether it's happening in your school. Okay, the next one is recruitment, placement, and mentoring of staff. Can you tell if that's happening just by walking through a classroom?
No.
No. Okay, so that's school-wide. You have to talk to teachers. Did you have a mentor? If you had a mentor, did it work? If you're a department chair, do you have any input in who they hire? You know, there's a lot of stuff there with the recruitment. What are you doing with recruiting? Are you just taking whoever the central office sends your way because it's easier than doing a lot of interviewing? I've got some horror stories about interviewing. but I also have some really wonderful people I got as a result of interviewing. So, you know, the interview process is one of the most important things you will ever do, because once you get them in the building, they're yours, honey. you have to grow them the way you want them. So if, you know, it's like choosing a plant. You want one with a strong, sturdy foundation and deep roots, and you do the right thing with them, they're gonna flower. And if you get one of those little stubby things that just barely made it out of the coal pile, it's going to be difficult for you. And so interviewing is really important. Don't let anybody tell you just take whoever they send. No. So we know about that. That's going to be school-wide. Okay, what about approaches to evaluation? Can you see that by walking through the classroom, or do you talk to teachers about whether it's a fair process and whether it's actually done right? Do they do a couple of walkthroughs that are 10 minutes long and then have you come and sign that they were in your classroom for an hour and that you did this or did that, and you know you really didn't? It was just easier for them to say you were at standard. That's the way to see your school go downhill fast. You got to be really authentic. You've got to go in there and you've got to know what you're looking for, and you've got to be able to document you saw it or you didn't see it. And then you've got to know what to do about it once you have the data. So that's a really important one, but it's school-wide, because you can ask your teachers and they can talk to you about whether they think evaluation is fair in your school, or whether it's done according to the standard that the county and the state have set. And you'd be surprised, sometimes it's not. Okay, teacher leadership. And
Dr. Tillman,
yes.
When you're talking,
Uh-huh.
when you're talking about that, this is during the literature review. So you're not actually talking about us like interviewing teachers or talking to teachers right now, because this is the literature review. So you're just talking about where we find research on it, correct?
And this is
okay.
This is what you're researching. These are the topics that you are researching. Okay. So,
okay.
And the last one is teacher leadership and decision making. Now, would you see that school-wide, or would you be able to see it walking through a classroom? Isn't teaching all about decision making? I had this beautiful lesson planned, and I swear that Johnny doesn't understand one of the key concepts. And I've got to stop and pull out something from my toolbox and get him on board before I move forward. Well, that's decision making if I've ever heard it. And you've got to be able to do it, or you'll leave half your class behind, because there's going to be students that don't understand. And so the decision making you make about what to teach and how to teach it, that's the bottom line about what happens in your classroom. So that's the classroom one. So when you look at the classroom stuff, I'm talking about the professional development one and the decision-making one. The other stuff, you're going to have to do some surveying. Now, back to the literature review. You've got these 5 areas. So you need to go and find a good reference. And Dr. Todd did a good job of talking about, you know, the ASCD Ed Leadership and the CAPN. You know, there's all kinds of, you can go to the U.S. Department of Ed. There's just all kinds of good places to go for work that's been jurored, and it's acceptable research. Okay, so you're going to do at least one good article on each of those 5 areas. You may need more, but at least one on each area. Okay? So, you find out what it should be like, and then you've got to think about, well, once I figure all that out, it says I'm going to create a checklist. Now, there is this difference between what Dr. Todd and I think and what is sometimes said. It's fine if you take the checklist from your principal or whatever when you do your walkthroughs, if that's what they say you need to do. But our feeling is we want you to look at the research in these areas, and we want you then to design your own checklist so that it becomes yours. It's like when you read a book. You can read the cliff notes about some book, and you can maybe pass the test. But when the book sale comes, you just throw that book on the pile because it really doesn't mean a whole lot to you. But if you read that book and you made little notes or you highlighted in the book, you really don't want to get rid of that book because that's your book and you understand it. And when somebody asks you about it, you can pick up that book and find that important quote that's just what you need. Well, that's the same way with research. You research the topics, and then you create a checklist that says what it should look like based on the research. So, when you talk about this checklist, it needs to have two sections. It needs to have a, here's the stuff I'm looking for when I do a walkthrough in the classroom. The other section is, what do I want to know about teachers in leadership in my school, school-wide? And I can't see that when I walk through. So how am I going to get it? Well, I'm going to survey. So you create a survey based on your research. When you were hired, did you have a mentor? Did you have a reduced class load? Did you have professional development? There are all kinds of things that you find in the research. As you research, what does the research say in these 5 areas, 3 of which are school-wide? And that's what should be on the checklist. Because from the checklist, you can then do a little survey, put it out there on SurveyMonkey or whatever one you like to use, and collect the data. And then that becomes part of your research and goes into your paper. Okay. So let's talk about the literature review one more time. The reason you're doing the literature review is to find out what the research says about 5 things. You must have at least one source for each of those 5 things. You may need more than that. Okay. Once you have the research, then you're going to be able to do a checklist based on what the research says should be going on in an effective school. And you've got 2 parts. You've got the classroom part, you've got the school-wide part. Okay. So, once you get the school-wide stuff from the research, you want to do a survey so you can collect the data for the school-wide part from the survey. How are you going to get the school-wide, the classroom checklist done? Well, you're going to do those walkthroughs. And that brings me to an important thing that you need to do tomorrow. You need to make sure your principal understands what you're about this semester, that you're doing research in these 5 areas, that you are creating a checklist, and that you need to do walkthroughs because you need his permission or her permission, their permission. They might let you go with them, or they might say, why don't you go with the assistant principal for instruction, or why don't you go with the curriculum facilitator, whoever it does that does walkthroughs in your school. It can be a wide range depending on the school system as who actually does a lot of this. But you need to hook yourself to their coattails and see if you can go with them and use your checklist. And I really encourage you to use your checklist simply because it's yours. I've had some people do some great checklists, and I'll bet you now if they are in a school, they are whipping that thing out and cranking it out of the copy machine, and they are using it because they know what it means and they know the research behind it. And if some teacher challenges them that why do they have to do it, they can tell the teacher why they have to do it because the research says this, and you can tell them. If it's just something somebody else handed you and you don't have any ownership of it, it's a different kind of instrument. It's an okay instrument, but it's not yours. You don't have buy-in with it. So I just think it's so important for you to understand the research behind what you do in your doings with teachers. Okay, so that seems to be what we need to do with task 1 is the research and coming up with the checklist. But in order to do the checklist, you've got to do a survey. Okay. Questions about that? I want to make sure it makes sense. I don't want you to go looking down rat holes and finding they're empty. That's not a good thing.
So could we have 2 separate ones? Could we have
2 sets of
a checklist for a classroom walkthrough and then a survey for the school-wide?
No,
Let me try again.
It's one checklist, and the checklist comes from the research.
Okay.
Okay. Once you have the checklist, then you survey your teachers by asking them questions to see if what the research says is what's going on in your school. In other words, the research says that
and is all that in task 1?
That is in task 1, because that's how you're going to get the checklist put together. Okay, the checklist, once you get the checklist done, once you get your data, then in 2, you do the analysis. Okay, so you have your data, and then you begin to analyze. Okay, so let's go ahead and flip over to 2, and then we'll come back and see if we can divide and conquer here. Okay, so in 2, it says that you're going to describe the data collection strategy. Okay, so how do you collect the data? Okay, so you've got your, in 1, you've got your research and you've made your checklist. Okay, So 2, if you turn the page, it says gap analysis and needs assessment. This should sound familiar, by the way. I hope it does. So you're going to describe your data collection strategies. Okay, so how did you get the data? Well, you did walkthroughs. So how many walkthroughs will the principal allow you to do? Try to do as many as you can. You can do them during your planning period. Sometimes principals will even give you some time to do them by putting, another teacher in there to help you. If you have a good mentor, they might come and take your class while you go observe some. Some people are so fortunate that it's their job to do walkthroughs. I have some of those in my classes, and this is a blessing for them because they have access to do the walkthroughs as part of their job. But you need to talk to your principal and make sure you arrange how you're going to do these walkthroughs. And if you're at the high school, it doesn't have to be in your department. It really should be across departments. In middle school, the same way. It should be across departments. Elementary, across grade levels, if at all possible, so that you get as good a database as possible to see, because you're going to be analyzing that. You're going to be coming up with the percentages of teachers where you saw this happening. You had to have evidence that it was happening. Okay, so then once you get the data, then you'll analyze that data, just like you did in the AAPSL. Okay, so it says here that you are going to describe the data collection strategies and criteria for the process of identifying the gaps. So you're actually going to talk about how did you do it? That's the big thing there. How did you do it? How did you collect? And how did you go about the process of identifying the gap between what's actually happening in your school and what the research says should be happening in your school? That's the gap you're looking for. The research says teachers should be using a variety of questioning strategies. And you go in and it's the who, what, when, where. And so you make a note of that. So when you go into the classroom, you've got to be prepared to do some of those quick note-taking things that will become part of your life. If you get into a position where you have to observe teachers, you've got to write a bunch of stuff, keep up with stuff. You'll find your own little way of doing shorthand so that you can keep up with what's going on in the classroom, or that's what I had to do. I sort of had my own little shorthand method. Okay, so we're looking for the difference between the best practice and what you see in the classroom, and that's the gap. Okay, so once you analyze
Hey, Dr. Tillman, I still don't understand from, and I'm sorry if I'm being dense about
okay.
this.
You're fine. When you talk about one, you're talking about the research and the checklist. And then when you get to 2.
Right. So really we have 3 things. So we've got the overall checklist. Then we also need to have a walkthrough form and the survey. So we need 3 things in task 1.
What actually most people do is when they do the research and they make their checklist, they usually put it on the same form. It's just that half of it is what they're looking for in the classroom and maybe on the back or the other side, or however they want to organize it. They have the things from the school-wide, the things they're looking for. But it all should be on the same.
Right, but to find that, to
What now?
do the gap analysis and to find all of that for tab 2, in order to do the gap analysis, you are going to have to make a survey to send out. I mean, you wouldn't send it out just as the checklist, right? I mean, you would have to format a survey.
No, the checklist, you have what you're looking for on the checklist. And then in 2, from the checklist items, you're going to create a survey to ask teachers questions that will help you determine whether you're meeting the checklist or not. Okay, the checklist.
Okay, now where does walkthrough form come in?
So we have the walkthrough information and the school-wide information basically on the same checklist, but they're 2 pieces of the checklist. Maybe think about it as 2 pieces, a front and a back.
Okay.
Or
thank you. Okay.
Okay, yeah, that's fine. So we've got the research, we put the best practices. And these are the ones for the classroom. These are the best practices school-wide. Okay, we're going to do walkthroughs to get the data for the classroom. We're going to do a survey to get the data for the school-wide. Does that clear that up? Questions about that? Because this is it's really important so that you don't go off on a wild tear and do more than you need to do, or do a lot on one side and not on the other, okay? And it's really important that early on, when you get into your peer review groups, don't let your peer review groups mess up on this. You need to have all 5 things being in your lit review, and then you need to check the checklist with the classroom things, and then the school-wide things, and then do the walkthroughs for the classroom and the survey for the school-wide. Okay, I think we've got that. Okay, so then once you establish the gap, then you make a statement of the needs assessment. What is it that you need to do? And you're going to have things school-wide, and you're going to have things classroom. Remember, you've got two areas. You've got leadership and empowerment. And sometimes I try to get teachers to think about it as the leadership stuff in classroom and empowerment as outside. But it's the research doesn't all come out that way, but there are researchers that do it that way. But it's 2 separate pieces. Okay. Now it says you have to establish the gap in these 5 areas. Okay, so are we going to say, well, the gap is we're not doing cooperative learning? No. You take each of those 5 areas and you look for a gap in that particular area. So that seems to mean that there needs to be more than one item on the checklist for each of the research pieces. For example, if you're talking about results-oriented professional development, when you go in the classroom, you want to have more than one item that you're looking for related to that. Or decision-making. You want to have more than one item on your checklist because it says right there in your rubric that you need to establish a gap in each of the 5 areas. Okay. So it says, identifying the gap between the actual practices and best practices researched and produced in task 1. Gaps in these 5 areas should be addressed in narrative form, referencing sources identified in the literature review when appropriate. In other words, this is a need because so-and-so said this should be happening. Okay, so you're going to be referencing your research there. And it gives you the 5 areas there. And it says the candidate analyzes the gap analysis to create a needs assessment addressing the 5 areas above. So, how many needs are we going to have? Yes, 5. Okay. So that's an important piece there. And so if you go over to proficient, it says that you're going to satisfactorily describe data collecting strategies and findings in the process of identifying the gap between actual practice and best practices researched in 1. And you're going to thoroughly cite best practices literature review sources. In other words, in 1, you did the literature review. So when you get to 2, you're going to be, when you talk about this gap, you're going to be talking about how you know it's a gap because you did this research. And it says here that students do better in comprehension and whatever if the questioning strategies are at a higher level. And you went in and they were all lower level. So you're citing that research that said they need to be higher level, okay, when you establish that as a gap. Does that make sense? Okay.
I do have one question.
What now?
I have a question
Yes.
about the data collection, because in just looking through that, I was thinking, can you pull in other sources like maybe a school climate or something that we're creating our survey, but could you pull in some other data from your school about school climate to add to this?
Well, that's a wonderful question, because when you get to the community involvement piece of this program, you're going to be tearing apart the climate survey that you have. So yes, you can do it, but no, don't do it here.
Okay.
Because you're going to be doing it again later, okay, for a completely different purpose. Okay. Actually, you tear part of it apart in one and then the rest of it in another. But that's excellent. If you have, if someone has done some recent surveys, like if your system has done some kind of surveys, but not the teacher working conditions survey. In South Carolina, it seems to me there is a survey, but it's not called the teacher working conditions survey. Does anyone remember what that is? If not, we'll have to track it down.
I can't remember, but we are required to take it every year.
Yes. Okay. So if I know that it's there, but you'll hear us, Dr. Todd and I will be talking about the teacher working conditions survey. But in South Carolina, there is one like it, but it's not called that, I don't think. So I just know that there is one. And your principal knows because you have to take it every year. But you would not use that here. Yeah. Okay. What other questions do you have about task 2? Now, I'm not going to go into depth with task 3 and 4, but knowing what you've done with this task, with the AAPSL, what do you think the next step is going to be after you've researched, you've made a checklist, you've gone in and checked it out, you've surveyed to get data, you've analyzed the data, you've come up with a needs assessment that lists at least one need in each of these areas? What do you think you're going to have to do next? What did you have to do?
Present it to your administrative team?
Well, you're going to have to come up with, what did you say, Ms. Brown? Ms. Brown, I didn't hear you.
I said research best practices and come up with an action plan.
You're going to have to come up with an action plan. And yes, Ms. Heatherly, you're going to have to present it to that administrative team. So you see, you're beginning to see the light. This is what it's going to be every time we have these meetings. We're just going to go through this cycle of figuring out what the research says is best, looking to see if we're doing that, and if we're not, figuring out the gap between what we say we should be doing and what we're actually doing, and then trying to figure out what we're going to do about it. Okay, so task 4 will be doing an action plan, and 3, and in 4, guess what you'll do after you finish the AAPTEL? Well, yes, I saw it. I saw
Reflect.
Yes, we're going to reflect, and that's when you'll do your competencies related to this project. Okay, so that's what this is all about, and we're looking to finish up on the AAPSL, get all that done, and then get started on the AAPTEL, because that research is really fun to read. I mean, I know you're under a lot of pressure. You're teaching, you're trying to get your internship hours. I know you're under a lot of pressure, but you will, I think, enjoy reading the research. One of the things that you might think about is Marzano. Some of you did Marzano in the last project, but he's a great guy to look at for classroom observations. You know, he's got that, you know, the 9 strategies that he says are just golden. And there's Todd Whitaker is another one that does great strategies. Linda Darling Hammond is really good, especially with the school-wide stuff. So those are people that I definitely would include in my research as you go through. But you can just search for those topics. Those are big topics in education, so it's not going to be hard to find information. So task 1, you're going to do the literature review. You're going to look at that rubric and make sure you've got the headings from that. You've got 5 topics, so you have at least 1 resource for each one. You have to have 6 if you want to be accomplished. You might have to have more than 6 if you're going to be really good. You're going to do a checklist that reflects your sources. 2, you're going to collect the data. You're going to have a topic that says data collection strategies, and you're going to make sure that you're always taking the classroom and the school-wide. Don't leave one behind and forget about it. Make sure that it's a double research project in the classroom and school-wide, because that's what most people do wrong, is that they forget to do one side or the other, and then they have to go back. So you do the gap analysis. You've got to work with all 5 areas. You're going to do a survey because how else will you find out all this information, whether people had a mentor or if they were offered a signing bonus when they came to, in your district, I'll bet you they're offering signing bonuses for some areas, and they're probably math, science, special ed, foreign language. They're usually the ones. I have a friend that moved here from Chicago, and they handed her a $5,000 check in the middle of the year as a signing bonus. She had to stay at least a semester to get the signing bonus. She's been here 4 or 5 years, but that's, that was to basically pay her moving expenses and let her know that they appreciated the fact she had a good math degree and they wanted her in the system. So, those are some of the things that you can't find that out unless you put it on a survey and ask, Yeah. Ms. Brown, did you have a question? I'm looking. What happened? Ms. Brown, do you have a question?
No, I'm just
Oh, okay. I just, I thought.
trying to take it all in.
Okay.
Mind blown.
All right, that's fine. Okay. So I think that's probably all I have, except I think one more time I want to say, I believe this is the 3rd time, which might be the charm. You need to talk to your principal about doing those walkthroughs. But before you talk to the principal, please know what you're doing and know what you're asking so that it comes across as you know exactly what you're doing. Okay, so that you give a good impression when you go in and ask. If you can go into classrooms either with the facilitator, with the assistant principal, with the principal, and get as many as you can. Sometimes, this is a good clue too, sometimes the principal will take your checklist and use it as their checklist when they do their walkthroughs for a week or so. And if you have a principal that does several walkthroughs a day, you've got some good data. And if he'll just put the grade level or some, or department, depending on whether you're high school or whatever, just so you have an idea about those teachers, who was actually, what kind of teachers were actually surveyed. That way you can get more data. Your percentages will be more accurate. If you only observe 5 teachers, well, 20%, one teacher. So you want to have as many as you can get so that your percentages really do reflect your school. Because when you do that action plan, you're going to be asking your principal to implement some of these strategies or to get some professional development in some areas. So you don't want to go off half-cocked. You want to make sure that what you're identifying is really the need in these areas. Okay? So that's all I have on my agenda today. What do you have that you have questions?
Dr. Tillman, I need a favor.
Yes.
I'm the one that deleted the definition of communication. And I need somebody to copy and paste it and send it to me so I can put it back. Has anybody
Is there someone that would help?
test stream and seen that thing yet?
Who was that said they would?
I tried to help her. I went into TaskStream, but I don't know enough about where everything is to figure out what she's talking about.
Okay. I will go in, and I think it was the first one, wasn't it? It was communication.
It was communication, yes.
Okay.
I thought I was supposed to delete it and write my own, so I started doing that. I didn't realize that was supposed to stay.
Okay.
But I would like to put it back.
Is there any other one that you did that also?
No, because I only did the first one to make sure it was right and sent it to
Okay.
you before I did any of the rest of them.
Good. And the
And so,
ones that I have looked at,
so I'm glad I did that.
the main thing is that you need to make sure that you do the digital competency if you did something that you want to enter there, and make sure you underline digital competency, bold, and that you tell what the tool was that you used and what you created with it and your level of competency. I tell you, when you get 63 of those babies in there, you're going to be so proud of it. You're going to attach it to your resume, and you can do that. And some of my better students have done that, and they have fine-tooth combed those to make sure that the nouns and the verbs agreed and that there was no, punctuation errors. And then they attached that sucker to their resume and just sent that baby right along. Say, look what I can do. And makes a difference. You have to have some of that efficacy where you know that you know. And there's nothing that can beat knowing that you know. And that's not being stuck up or haughty. That's, if you know, you just quietly do it. And the world notices. Yeah. All right. So I'm ready to shut this baby down if you are. Any other questions?
I have one more question. I have one more question on task 4. It's a task 4 question.
Yeah, okay.
So the highlighted things to talk, do I have to list them separately, or are they included within like building efficacy and the shared vision? Can that be built into the POC meeting, or does that have to be listed separately? Because I kind of said all of that stuff within the meeting. It was kind of stated, but I also, because I wasn't for sure, have typed it out in narrative form under the headings, but I didn't know which way was the right way.
Oh, you're talking about whether you should have a narrative about your action plan?
No, a narrative. You know how impromptu it says that the discussion should include, but it's not limited to, the following topics, and it's like building efficacy, sustained growth, and shared vision. Those things. So I was wondering, do I put like those as subheadings and have a narrative underneath each one separately, yes, or is that embedded into my meeting?
That is a good question. I love that question. You're thinking, girl. Okay. So when you start the narrative and you start putting this information out there, you want to clearly show the 5 areas, because you've got to address those 5 areas. So it's much better if you do the headings for each area, so that the evaluator is going to go, okay, and if they're in a rush, they're going to go, oh, look, yes, there's, yes. So you're going to, even in the research part, when you do task 1, here's the lit review. Well, here's item 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and under each of those items, you have your research. So you've got a little mini research on each of those 5 areas. And then just carry that same thing through as you talk about each one. Make sure you stay with those 5 areas, because all the way through it says you have to do all 5. And one of the things that happens semester after semester after semester is that somebody will just think they have to do the one that's the worst. And then they have to go back and do it all over. Okay. So when you get into your group.
Okay, so I kind of.
Go ahead.
Okay, so what I did was, so if I embedded it into when it says intervention POC meeting, so I kind of talked about all of that stuff, like the efficacy as far as the relationships with the students to get them to grow, between student, teacher, student, teacher, whatever. So I also had it kind of like sounds redundant because it's kind of, I did it both ways just because I didn't know which way was the right way. So do I need to go back and just delete it from the meeting where I mentioned that stuff and just have it in the narrative? But it kind of is like,
I'm confused about where we are. I thought you were talking about the AAPTEL. Is that what we're talking about? Okay. And so you are on task 4?
No, I'm talking about task 4 on the AAPSL. Yeah, on the AAPSL. I'm actually.
Okay. So on that's what I started saying. And then you said the efficacy one, which is here. And I thought you were switching gears and I couldn't quite follow. Okay.
No, ma'am.
That was my fault. Okay. Back on 4 where you're doing the action plan, right? That's where you are. The action plan, right? Okay.
Yes.
All right. You do have to do the narrative and you do each of the things. You go through the whole thing. You talk about it in a narrative, section by section. And then, voila, here it is in the graphic format. Okay, so it's
okay.
redundant in a way, but what's in the school improvement plan format is the graphic organizer. But above that, it should be fleshed out in sentences and a little more discussion. In the graphic, you might just say the name of the strategy, and then you might, you've got headings, so you're just going to abbreviate so that it's not just so wordy in the graphic, but it's got to be fleshed out in the narrative above. Did that help?
Yes.
Good. Okay. I love questions.
A copy of the I didn't.
Go ahead.
I say of the sheet I got from the school plan, like us being a new school, they haven't actually, we only have indicated, we only have so far as to fill in all the information. That's what they're going to do at the November meeting. So that's it. So they gave, I have a copy of the actual graphic that they're going to use, but stuff isn't filled in like officially because we're a new school.
Well, I think if you,
and that's just, where we're at.
Okay. I think if you just use what they're giving you as a draft, just so that you have everything filled in that's required for the rubric, which would be the strategy and who's going to do it, the timeline, formative and summative assessment, your ultimate goals, those things. Make sure that all that's there, and that's perfectly fine. Okay, that was a good question, Ms. Hall.
Okay.
Okay, other questions?
Thank you.
Any question, Ms. Hayward? Do you have a question? No? Okay. Okay. I think that must be it. So I'm going to end the meeting, and I look forward.
Good night.
Yeah, I want to make sure that everybody try to get these things in, get the paper put together. I think Dr. Todd has told you exactly what's expected to get that paper put together. If you have questions, make sure you call me before you do it to save you time, because I really want you to save time so you can just move on to the AAPTEL. Okay? And if everybody wants to leave, I think Ms. Hall would like to talk with me. If anybody else would like to stay for the meeting, I'm going to close the recording, and then we'll stay on if anybody else has questions of a private nature. Okay? Good night.